The fuel gauge read 12 minutes when the first enemy fighter rolled out of the sun 3 miles ahead. Lieutenant David Hayes tightened his grip on the control stick. His engine coughed once. The bomber formation behind him carried 40 tons of explosives and 300 men. If he turned back now, they would die. If he stayed, his fuel would run out over enemy territory. The math was simple and terrible. He had practiced 1,000 landings, but never this choice. Would 12 minutes be enough time to protect the bombers and still make it home? The question hung in his mind as the enemy fighter grew larger in his gun sight. His wingman called something over the radio. Hayes did not answer. He pushed the throttle forward and felt the engine surge. The fuel needle dropped another mark. The bomber formation stretched below him like a steel parade. 20 heavy bombers flew in tight formation. Each plane carried 10 men and 2 tons of bombs. Hayes had met some of those men at breakfast. They had joked about the mission. No one mentioned the fuel shortage. No one talked about the enemy fighters that always came. The sun burned white behind the approaching fighter. Hayes squinted against the glare. His goggles helped, but not enough. The enemy plane grew from a dot to a shape. Wings reflected light. The fighter turned slightly left. Hayes recognized the profile. It was fast and armed with cannons. The pilot knew what he was doing. Hayes glanced at his fuel gauge again. 11 minutes now. His heart hammered in his chest. Sweat ran down his temple despite the cold air. The bomber crews were counting on him. Their families back home were counting on them. The chain of trust stretched across the ocean. If he broke that chain now, what would happen to all those people? The radio crackled in his ear. His wingman spoke with forced calm. The other pilot had seen the enemy too. Hayes keyed his mic. His voice came out steady. He gave simple orders. Stay close. Watch for more fighters. Protect the bombers. His wingman acknowledged. The 2 friendly fighters moved into position. The enemy fighter kept coming. Then the enemy pilot opened fire. Tracers arced through the sky like bright beads on a string. The rounds passed 100 yards to the left. It was a ranging shot. The enemy wanted to test the distance. Hayes did not flinch. He held his course. The bombers depended on that. He counted 3 seconds and fired back. His guns chattered. Spent casings tumbled past his canopy. The recoil shook his plane. The enemy fighter broke hard right. Smoke puffed from its wing. Hayes had hit something. The enemy pilot was good, but not perfect. The fighter pulled into a steep climb. Hayes followed. His engine roared. The fuel gauge showed 10 minutes. He tried not to think about it. The enemy climbed higher. Hayes climbed too. The bombers fell away below. His wingman called a warning. 2 more enemy fighters were diving from above. Hayes cursed under his breath. 3 enemies now. 2 friendly fighters. 10 minutes of fuel. The odds were bad. He rolled left and pulled hard. The world spun around him. Sky became ground. Ground became sky. His vision tunneled at the edges. He relaxed the pull slightly. The tunnel widened. He searched the sky for the new threats. There, 2 dark shapes plunging down like hawks. The enemy fighters split apart. One went after Hayes. One went after his wingman. It was a standard tactic. Divide and conquer. Hayes had read about it in training. Reading about it was different from living it. The enemy fighter closed fast. Hayes could see the propeller now. The spinning blades caught the sunlight. The fighter's nose lit up with gunfire. Hayes jerked his stick left. Tracers streaked past his canopy. Some passed so close he heard them snap. His plane shuddered in the turbulence. He reversed right and pulled up. The enemy followed. Hayes climbed vertical. His airspeed bled away fast. The enemy climbed too. Hayes watched his airspeed indicator. The needle dropped past 100, past 90. At 80 he kicked the rudder hard. His fighter stalled and spun. The enemy flashed past above him. Hayes recovered from the spin and dove. The enemy tried to follow but overshot. Hayes had a brief advantage. He took it. His guns fired. Bullets walked across the enemy's tail. Metal sparked. The enemy fighter rolled away trailing smoke. Hayes did not chase. He turned back toward the bombers. His fuel gauge showed 9 minutes. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline made everything sharp and bright. He could see every rivet on the nearest bomber. He could see faces in the waist windows. The gunners waved. Hayes did not wave back. He scanned the sky for more enemies. His wingman called in. The other pilot had driven off his attacker. Both friendly fighters regrouped. The bomber formation flew steady. They were approaching the target. The lead bomber's navigator would be checking his maps now. The bombardier would be crawling into the nose compartment. The pilot would be making small corrections. Hayes knew the routine. He had flown close support a dozen times. This time felt different. The fuel situation made everything feel different. Another enemy fighter appeared. This one came from below. It climbed fast and aimed for the last bomber in the formation. Hayes saw it first. He called the warning and dove. His engine screamed. The enemy was fast. Hayes was faster. He closed the distance in seconds. The enemy saw him coming and broke off. The bomber was safe for now. Hayes climbed back to escort position. His fuel gauge showed 8 minutes. He was halfway through his reserve. The math was becoming impossible. His wingman called again. More enemy fighters were gathering to the north. Hayes counted them. 5 new contacts. 7 total, including the earlier ones. The enemy was massing for a big attack. They knew the bombers were vulnerable. They knew the escorts were low on fuel. Someone had planned this well. Hayes felt cold anger in his chest. He keyed his radio and called the bomber lead. The bomber pilot acknowledged. They were 10 minutes from the target. Hayes did 7 minutes of fuel. The bomber needed 10 minutes. Hayes did not say anything. The bomber pilot understood. The line went quiet. Then the enemy attacked in force. 5 fighters dove together. They came from the sun again. Hayes barely saw them in time. He shouted a warning and turned to meet them. His wingman followed, 2 escorts against 5 attackers. The odds were very bad now. Hayes selected the lead enemy and fired. His bullets missed. The enemy scattered. 2 went high. 2 went low. 1 came straight at Hayes. It was a game of chicken. Hayes held course. The enemy held course. They closed at 600 miles per hour. Combined speed. Hayes could see the enemy pilot's helmet. The enemy fired first. Tracers filled the air between them. Hayes fired back. His windscreen starred from a hit. Cracks spread across the glass. Hayes broke left at the last second. The enemy broke right. They missed each other by 20 feet. Hayes' heart hammered so hard it hurt. He checked his plane. Everything still worked. The engine ran smooth. The controls responded. Only the windscreen was damaged. He could see through the cracks well enough. He turned back toward the bombers. 2 enemy fighters were making runs on the formation. The bomber gunners fired back. Tracers crossed in every direction. Hayes dove on the nearest enemy. He fired a long burst. The enemy fighter pulled up smoking. Hayes did not see where it went. He was already turning toward the next threat. His fuel gauge showed 6 minutes. His mind did the math automatically. The target was 8 minutes away. He could not make it home. The realization hit him like cold water. He was going to run out of fuel over enemy territory. If he stayed with the bombers, he would have to bail out or crash land. If he turned back now, he might reach friendly lines. The choice was sharp and clear. 300 men in the bombers or 1 pilot in the fighter. Hayes kept flying toward the target. His wingman was fighting 2 enemies at once. The other pilot was good, but outnumbered. Hayes climbed to help. 1 enemy saw him coming and turned to engage. Hayes fired from long range. The enemy broke off. Hayes rejoined his wingman. Together they drove the enemies away. The bombers kept flying straight. The tight formation never wavered. Hayes admired their discipline. Those crews knew they were in danger. They flew on anyway. More enemies appeared. Hayes lost count. 8 or 9 fighters circled the formation like wolves. They attacked in pairs. One would make a run while another watched. If the escorts went after the first, the second would strike. It was smart tactics. Hayes and his wingman stayed close to the bombers. They could not chase every enemy. They had to protect the formation. The bomber gunners helped. Their guns filled the sky with lead. The enemies stayed cautious. No one wanted to fly through that fire. Hayes checked his fuel again. 5 minutes. His mouth was dry. His hands ached from gripping the stick. The target was 6 minutes ahead. He was not going to make it back. He accepted that fact. It felt like stepping off a cliff. Once he accepted it, the fear faded. He had a job to do. He would do it until his engine quit. What happened after that did not matter. His mother's face flashed in his mind. She would get a telegram. Hayes pushed the thought away. He focused on the sky. The enemy attacks intensified. They knew the escorts were low on fuel. They pressed harder. Hayes fired at one fighter and missed. He fired at another and hit. The enemy trailed smoke and limped away. Hayes counted his ammunition. He had maybe 30 seconds of firing time left. After that, he would be defenseless. He made every shot count. His wingman called bingo fuel. The other pilot had to turn back or crash. Hayes ordered him to return to base. His wingman protested. Hayes repeated the order. His voice was hard. The wingman reluctantly broke formation and headed for home. Hayes was alone now. 10 enemies against 1 escort. The bombers kept flying. The target was 4 minutes ahead. Hayes' fuel gauge showed 4 minutes. He would make it to the target. He would not make it home. He was at peace with that. The enemy fighters circled closer. They sensed weakness. Hayes turned to face them. His guns were almost empty. His fuel was almost gone. He was still flying. That was enough. One enemy made a run on the lead bomber. Hayes intercepted. He fired his remaining ammunition in one long burst. The enemy pulled up, trailing flames. Hayes' guns clicked empty. He was out of bullets. The enemy knew it. 2 fighters moved in for the kill. Hayes had no weapons left. He still had his plane. He turned toward the nearest enemy. The enemy saw him coming and hesitated. Hayes kept coming. The enemy broke off. No one wanted to collide. Hayes used that. He flew like his plane was a weapon. The enemies kept their distance. The bombers reached the target. The lead plane opened its bomb doors. The others followed. Hayes saw the target below. It was a railroad yard. Tracks curved in complex patterns. Trains sat on sidings. Buildings clustered near the tracks. This was what they came to destroy. The bombers held steady. The bombardiers sighted carefully. Hayes circled above. Enemy fighters circled too. No one attacked during the bomb run. It was an unspoken rule. Let the bombers drop, then fight. Hayes did not trust it, but he appreciated it. The bombs fell. They tumbled away from the bombers in dark streams. Hayes counted seconds. The bombs hit. Explosions rippled across the rail yard. Fire and smoke climbed into the sky. The shock waves reached Hayes's altitude. His plane bounced in the turbulence. The railroad yard disappeared under smoke. The bombers turned for home. Their job was done. Hayes's job was not finished. His fuel gauge showed 2 minutes. His engine would quit soon. The enemy fighters attacked again. Hayes had no ammunition. He used his plane as a shield. He flew between the enemies and the bombers. The enemies tried to get around him. Hayes blocked them. They fired at him. He dodged. Tracers passed above and below. His windscreen took another hit. More cracks appeared. He could barely see. He flew by instinct. The bombers pulled away. They were faster now without the bomb weight. Hayes fell behind. The enemies focused on him. His engine coughed. The fuel was running out. Hayes felt the power fade. The propeller slowed. The engine coughed again, and quit. Sudden silence filled the cockpit. Only the wind noise remained. Hayes was gliding now. The enemy fighters circled. They did not fire. They watched. Hayes looked down. Enemy territory stretched in every direction. Towns and fields and forests. He could bail out. The enemy would capture him. He would spend the rest of the war in a prison camp, or he could try to glide to friendly lines. That was impossible. He was too deep in enemy territory. Hayes spotted a field ahead. It was rough but flat enough. He aimed for it. His plane descended steadily. The enemies followed. Hayes lowered his landing gear. The wheels locked down. He trimmed the plane for the slowest possible speed. The field rushed up. Trees bordered it on two sides. Hayes would have to land short or crash into the trees. He aimed for the near edge of the field. His plane dropped over the trees. The wheels touched grass. The plane bounced. It touched again and rolled. Hayes stood on the brakes. The plane slowed. It stopped 50 feet from the far trees. Hayes sat still for a moment. He was alive. He was on the ground. The enemy fighters buzzed overhead. Hayes unstrapped and climbed out. His legs shook. He stood on the wing and looked around. The field was empty. Trees surrounded it. He heard engines overhead. The enemy fighters waggled their wings and flew away. Hayes wondered about that. Maybe they respected the fight. Maybe they were low on fuel too. He would never know. Hayes jumped down from the wing. He had to move. Enemy soldiers would come soon. He ran toward the trees. Behind him, his fighter sat in the field like a monument. He had flown it until the fuel ran dry. He had protected the bombers. 300 men would go home because of what he did today. Hayes disappeared into the trees. The afternoon sun cast long shadows. He was alone in enemy territory. He was a long way from home, but the bombers were safe. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. Hayes moved through the forest carefully. Every sound made him freeze. Birds called in the trees. Wind rustled leaves. He heard nothing human. He walked east. That was toward friendly lines. The distance was impossible, but he had to try. His survival training came back to him. Move at night. Hide during the day. Find water. Avoid roads. Stay away from towns. The rules were simple. Following them would be hard. The sun dropped lower. Shadows grew longer. Hayes found a stream and drank. The water was cold and clean. He filled his canteen. He had emergency rations in his flight suit. He ate one chocolate bar. It tasted like cardboard but gave him energy. He kept moving. The forest was dense. He pushed through undergrowth. Thorns caught his flight suit. He ignored them. Distance was everything now. Every mile east was 1 mile closer to safety. Night fell. The forest became dark. Hayes could barely see. He found a thick bush and crawled underneath. He would rest here until dawn. He could not move safely in complete darkness. He lay on the ground and tried to sleep. His mind replayed the mission. The fuel gauge, the enemy fighters, the bombers dropping their payload, his engine cutting out. Every moment was sharp in his memory. He wondered if his wingman made it home. He hoped so. He finally slept. His dreams were full of engines and tracers. Dawn came grey and cold. Hayes woke stiff and sore. He ate another ration bar and drank from his canteen. He moved east again. The forest gave way to farm fields. He skirted the edge, staying in the trees. He saw a farmhouse in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney. He gave it a wide berth. He could not trust anyone here. They might help. They might turn him in. The risk was too high. He walked all morning. The sun climbed higher. Hayes stayed in cover when possible. He crossed a dirt road quickly. No vehicles passed. He found another stream and refilled his canteen. He was making progress. How much he did not know. Maybe 5 miles. Maybe 10. It did not matter. He kept moving. That was all he could do. Afternoon brought trouble. Hayes heard engines. He dove into a ditch as two enemy trucks drove past on a nearby road. Soldiers sat in the back. They were looking for something. Hayes pressed himself into the mud. The trucks passed. He waited 5 minutes and moved on. The enemy was searching. They knew a pilot had come down. Hayes had to be more careful. He changed tactics. He moved slower and checked every sightline. He used ditches and hedgerows for cover. He avoided high ground where he might be silhouetted. His training had covered escape and evasion. He used every trick he remembered. The day wore on. He covered less distance but stayed hidden. That was the trade. Speed versus stealth. Right now stealth mattered more. He found a barn as the sun set. It was isolated and looked abandoned. Hayes watched it for 30 minutes. No one came. No lights showed. He crept closer. The barn door hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside he found old hay and farm tools. No animals, no people. Hayes climbed into the hayloft and burrowed into the hay. It smelled musty but provided warmth. He ate his last ration bar. Tomorrow he would have to find food. Tonight he needed rest. He slept deeply. The next day, Hayes moved more carefully. He saw patrols twice. Both times he hid and let them pass. He was getting better at this. His confidence grew. He found apples in an orchard and ate 4. They were small and sour, but food was food. He refilled his canteen at a pump behind a house. He did it at noon when the farmers were likely eating lunch. No one saw him. He moved on. Days blurred together. Hayes lost track of how many. 3? 4? His beard grew. His flight suit was torn and dirty. He stank. He did not care. He was alive and moving east. That was victory enough. He thought about the bomber crews. They were home by now. They would have reported him missing. His commander would have written the telegram. Hayes hoped they mentioned the bombers made it safely. He hoped his mother would know he had done his duty. On what might have been the 5th day, Hayes heard artillery. The sound rolled across the landscape, like distant thunder. He knew that sound. It was the front line. Friendly forces were shelling enemy positions. That meant he was close. Hope surged in his chest. He moved faster. He stopped worrying about stealth. Speed mattered now. The artillery grew louder. Hayes reached a ridge and looked down. A valley stretched below. Smoke hung over the far side. Flashes marked gun positions. Between here and there was no man's land. Torn earth, barbed wire, shell craters. Hayes would have to cross it. He waited for darkness. Crossing in daylight would be suicide. Both sides would shoot at anything moving. He found a shell hole and hunkered down. The hours crawled past. Artillery rumbled. Small arms fire crackled. Men were dying down there. Hayes waited. Full darkness came late. Hayes climbed out of his hole and started down the ridge. He moved from crater to crater. The ground was churned mud. His boots sank with each step. Barbed wire blocked his path. He crawled under it. Barbs caught his suit and skin. He ignored the pain. He was committed now. Forward was the only option. Enemy flares burst overhead. Hayes froze in a crater. The flares drifted down on tiny parachutes. Light swept across the wasteland. Hayes pressed into the mud. The flares died. Darkness returned. He moved again. Machine guns chattered somewhere to his left. Bullets cracked overhead. Hayes crawled faster. His hands and knees were caked in mud. He could barely breathe from exertion and fear. Another flare burst. He froze again. A patrol was moving nearby. Enemy soldiers. 5 of them. They were sweeping no man's land. Hayes lay still. The patrol passed 20 yards away. They did not see him. The flare died. Hayes waited until they were gone. He crawled on. He reached the middle of no man's land. Friendly lines were ahead somewhere. He could hear English voices calling to each other. Hayes was afraid to call out. Friendly soldiers might shoot first and ask questions later. He needed to identify himself clearly. He pulled off his torn flight suit jacket. His uniform shirt was underneath. It had US markings. He held the jacket over his head and stood up slowly. His voice was hoarse. He called out. He identified himself. He gave his rank and unit. He said he was a downed pilot coming in. His hands shook. He expected bullets. None came. A voice challenged him from the darkness. Hayes answered with the password. He had memorized it before the mission. He prayed it had not changed. The voice called out again. Hayes was ordered to walk forward slowly with his hands up. He obeyed. His heart hammered. He walked through the darkness. Shapes moved ahead. Soldiers rose from fighting positions. Rifles pointed at him. Hayes kept his hands high. He kept walking. A light clicked on. It blinded him. Someone asked questions. Hayes answered. His story spilled out. The mission, the fuel, the landing, the walk east. The light lowered. A soldier stepped forward. He was a sergeant. His face was hard from years of war. He looked Hayes over and nodded. "Welcome back," he said. Hayes almost collapsed. His legs went weak. Other soldiers caught him. They led him to a bunker and gave him water. Someone brought food. Hayes ate like a starving dog. The soldiers watched with tired smiles. They had seen this before. Downed pilots, lost infantry, men who walked through hell to get home. Hayes was just another one. A medic checked him over. Cuts and bruises, dehydration, exhaustion, nothing serious. Hayes would live. The sergeant made a report on the radio. Someone at headquarters would notify his unit. Hayes sat in the bunker and listened to the war continue outside. Artillery still rumbled. Small arms still crackled. The front line never slept. Men fought and died while others ate and rested. It was the rhythm of war. Hayes understood it now in a way he never had before. Hours later, a jeep arrived. An officer climbed out. He asked Hayes questions. Hayes answered. The officer took notes. He seemed satisfied. Hayes would be debriefed properly at headquarters. For now, he needed rest. The officer offered Hayes a ride. Hayes accepted. They drove through the darkness. The front line fell behind. Hayes watched through the windshield. He was going home, not all the way home, but back to his unit, back to his squadron. That was close enough. That was a kind of miracle. They reached the airfield at dawn. Hayes climbed out of the jeep. His legs were steadier now. The officer pointed him toward the operations building. Hayes walked across the tarmac. Fighters sat in neat rows. Ground crews worked on engines. Pilots stood in small groups, drinking coffee. Hayes saw his squadron's insignia on the nearest plane. He was home. A figure broke away from a group and ran toward him. It was his wingman. The other pilot grabbed Hayes in a rough hug. Hayes hugged back. His wingman was talking fast. "Everyone thought you were dead. The bombers all made it. Command wants to pin a medal on you." Hayes barely heard. He was too tired, too overwhelmed. He just nodded. His commander appeared. The major was a tough man who rarely showed emotion. Today his eyes were bright. He shook Hayes's hand. "Well done," he said. Hayes did not know what to say. He had only done his job. The major seemed to understand. He ordered Hayes to the mess hall, and then to quarters. Rest first. Debrief later. Hayes obeyed. He ate a hot meal, eggs and bacon and toast and coffee. It was the best food he had ever tasted. Other pilots sat with him. They asked questions. Hayes answered when he could. Mostly he just ate. Afterward he found his bunk. Someone had already stripped it and boxed his belongings. They thought he was dead. Hayes did not care. He lay down on the bare mattress. He was asleep in seconds. He slept for 16 hours straight. No dreams troubled him. He woke feeling almost human. Someone had left clean clothes on the chair. Hayes showered and dressed. He looked at himself in a mirror. A stranger stared back. Thinner, harder, older. The mission had changed him. He saw it in his own eyes. The debrief took all morning. Intelligence officers asked detailed questions. Hayes told them everything. The mission, The fuel situation, the combat, the landing, the evasion, the walk through enemy territory. The officers took notes. They seemed impressed. Hayes did not feel impressive. He had survived. That was all. Many pilots did not. He had been lucky. The commanding officer called him in that afternoon. Hayes stood at attention. The colonel was an older man with grey at his temples. He had flown in the last war. He understood what Hayes had done. He promoted Hayes to captain on the spot. Hayes was too surprised to speak. The colonel smiled. "Your actions saved 300 men and 20 bombers," he said. "That turns a promotion and a medal. The ceremony would be next week." Hayes saluted. The colonel returned it. "Dismissed, Captain." Hayes walked out in a daze. Captain? He had been a lieutenant for 2 years. One mission had changed that. He found his wingman and told him. The other pilot whooped and slapped his back. They went to the officers' club that night. Other pilots bought them drinks. Hayes did not drink much. He was still tired, but he enjoyed the company. These men understood. They flew the same missions. They faced the same dangers. They were brothers in a way civilians could never comprehend. The next week passed in a blur of routine flights and training. Hayes flew escort missions again. The fuel situation had improved. Someone in logistics had fixed the supply problem. Hayes did not worry about running out anymore. That weight had lifted. He flew well. His confidence had grown. Surviving behind enemy lines did that to a man. If he could walk out of enemy territory, he could handle anything the sky threw at him. The medal ceremony was brief and formal. The commanding general pinned the decoration on Hayes' chest. Photographers took pictures. Hayes stood still and tried to look dignified. He felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had done what any pilot would do, but the general disagreed. "Your actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service," the general said. "You chose duty over safety. You protected your brothers in arms at great personal risk. That is heroism." Hayes did not argue. His mother received the photos a month later. She wrote him a long letter. She said she was proud but also terrified. Every day she worried. Hayes wrote back and told her not to worry. He was fine. He did not mention that he flew combat missions 3 times a week. He did not mention the close calls and the friends who did not come back. She did not need that burden. He told her he loved her. He told her he would be home when the war ended. That was enough. The war dragged on. Hayes flew 50 more missions. Some were easy milk runs. Others were desperate fights. He shot down 3 more enemy fighters. He was shot up twice but made it home both times. He learned to read the sky like a book. He could spot enemy fighters at incredible distances. He could predict their moves. He became an ace. Other pilots looked up to him. He trained new arrivals. He taught them the tricks that kept him alive. Some learned. Some died anyway. War was random that way. Skill helped, but luck mattered more. One day the war ended. The announcement came over the radio. Germany had surrendered. Men cheered and cried and got drunk. Hayes felt oddly empty. He had spent 2 years fighting. Now there was nothing to fight. The purpose that had driven him was gone. He wandered around the airfield feeling lost. His wingman found him and dragged him to the party. Hayes drank and tried to celebrate. It felt hollow. Maybe it would feel real later. Right now it just felt strange. The squadron started going home in groups. Hayes' turn came 3 weeks after the surrender. He packed his few belongings and said goodbye to his plane. He had flown it for a year. It had brought him home every time. He ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cold and familiar. "Thank you," he whispered. It sounded foolish, but he meant it. The plane had saved his life. He owed it something. The transport flight home took 2 days with stops for fuel. Hayes watched the ocean pass below. He thought about the mission that had changed everything. The fuel gauge showing 12 minutes. The decision to stay. The walk through enemy territory. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like yesterday. The memories would never fade. He knew that. He would carry them forever. They were part of him now, scars on his soul. The transport landed at a base on the coast. Hayes climbed out and stepped onto American soil. It felt good. It felt right. He was home, really home. Not just back to his unit. Home to his country. Other soldiers cheered. Some kissed the ground. Hayes just stood and breathed. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, sweeter, free. He had forgotten what that smelled like. His mother met him at the train station. She had aged. Her hair was grayer. Her face had more lines, but her eyes were the same. She grabbed him and held on. Hayes hugged her back. He towered over her now. When had that happened? She cried into his chest. He held her and said nothing. There were no words for what they both felt. Relief, joy, grief for lost years, love that had survived separation. It was too much and not enough. Hayes just held her. They went home. His childhood house looked smaller. Everything looked smaller. The streets, the yards, the trees. Hayes wondered if he had grown or if the world had shrunk. Maybe both. His mother made dinner, his favorite meal, pot roast and potatoes and pie. Hayes ate slowly. The food was delicious, but he could not enjoy it. He kept thinking about the men who would never eat their mother's cooking again, the pilots who died, the bomber crews who burned. He was alive, and they were not. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach. His mother noticed. She asked if he was all right. Hayes lied and said yes. She did not believe him, but she did not push. She had heard stories from neighbors whose sons came back. They all said the same thing. The boys were different. Quieter, sadder, changed. Hayes saw the worry in her eyes. He wanted to tell her he would be fine. He wanted to believe it himself. Instead, he excused himself and went to bed early. He lay in his old room and stared at the ceiling. Model airplanes hung from strings. Posters of fighters covered the walls, relics from before the war. Before he knew what combat really meant, Hayes thought about taking them down. They seemed childish now. He left them. Maybe they reminded him of who he used to be. Maybe he needed that reminder. He slept poorly. The days fell into a pattern. Hayes tried to find normal. He helped around the house. He saw old friends who had also returned. They swapped stories carefully. No one talked about the bad parts. They talked about funny incidents and close calls they survived. They laughed too hard at jokes that were not that funny. They were all pretending. Hayes could see it. They could see it in him. But they all kept pretending. It was easier than facing the truth. Hayes got a job at a factory. The work was boring, but it filled the hours. He was good with machines. His hands remembered skills from the squadron. The other workers were nice. Most had served somewhere. They understood when Hayes got quiet. They left him alone when he needed space. Hayes appreciated that. He settled into a routine. Work, dinner, sleep. Repeat. The routine was comforting. It gave structure to days that otherwise felt empty. Time passed. Months became years. Hayes got promoted at the factory. He met a girl. Her name was Ruth. She was a nurse. She had seen soldiers come home broken. She understood Hayes in a way others did not. They dated. They fell in love. They got married. Hayes thought maybe he could be happy again. Maybe the war would fade. Maybe he could be normal. Ruth helped. She was patient when he woke from nightmares. She listened when he finally talked about the war. She did not judge. She just loved him. That was enough. They had children. 2 boys. Hayes taught them to build model airplanes. He told them stories about flying. He did not tell them about the killing. That was his burden to carry. They did not need it. His sons grew up happy. They loved their father. Hayes loved them back with fierce intensity. They were his reason for surviving. They were his reward for coming home. Every day with them was a gift. Hayes never forgot that. Years turned into decades. Hayes grew old. His hair went white. His back bent. His hands shook. But his memory stayed sharp. He could still see the fuel gauge showing 12 minutes. He could still feel the stick in his hand. He could still hear the engine cut out. The mission was part of him. It always would be. He had made a choice that day. Duty over safety. The bombers over himself. 300 men lived because of that choice. Hayes had never regretted it. Not once in 50 years. He would make the same choice again. That certainty comforted him. He had done the right thing. That had to be enough. Hayes died quietly in his sleep. At 82, his wife found him in the morning. He looked peaceful. Ruth called their sons. They came quickly. They sat with their father's body and remembered Hayes had been a good man, a good husband, a good father. He had done his duty and lived with honor. What more could anyone ask? They buried him with military honors. A bugler played taps. Soldiers folded the flag. They gave it to Ruth. She clutched it to her chest. Hayes would have appreciated the ceremony. He had been a soldier once. He had served his country. He had protected his brothers. That part of him never died. It lived on in his sons, in his grandchildren, in the story of one mission where a pilot chose others over himself. That was his legacy. That was his immortality. The fuel gauge showing 12 minutes. The decision to stay. The bombers coming home safe. That was what mattered. That was all that would ever matter.